Good evening, everybody, and I hope it's a lovely, warm, sunny evening wherever you are, as it is here in Green Templeton College. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to one of our annual astronomy lectures, and I think it's a really special time for us to have the astronomy lecture this year. We were just discussing a few minutes ago with Charles Barkley how we've been reconnecting with nature and how beautiful it has been, and those of us who've watched the supermoon and Venus and so on during relatively clear nights have really found it a very special time. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to hear Charles, and I'm pleased that we've got such a big audience. So the format of the evening is that Charles will give his talk, and we're asking you to remain muted for that. And then if you'd like to ask a question or contribute to discussion, if you could just indicate that in the chat box. My colleague Haley will be managing those questions and discussion at the end. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Charles Barkley, who I think will be familiar to most of the college members who are on the line today. He's an Associate Fellow of Green Templeton College, and as an Associate Fellow at the college, he is convener of the annual Astronomy for All lectures. He's an outreach astronomer, director of the Blackett Observatory at Marlborough College, and academic visitor in the Astrophysics department here at Oxford. And he's also the immediate past Vice President of the Royal Astronomical Society. So he's a really wonderful person to give us the talk this evening, and I think his brief synopsis of the talk whetted all of our appetites. So over to you, Charles, and my only regret is that you're not doing it in the wonderful observatory, but it's fantastic that you're here.
Thank you very much, Denise, Principal. Good evening to everyone watching in the comfort of your home. It's a very strange environment to be in. Little did we know last December when we moved the talks from their February slot back to their, in fact, original mid-May slots that we'd be in this environment. I'm going to just now move and share my screen. So just bear with me a second as I do that. And in fact, what I was going to say was bear with me if there are any IT glitches, and it's all a learning curve. So hopefully now you will be able to see the screen, and I'll go through the slides from there. It really has been my pleasure to host lectures, Astronomy for All, based at Green Templeton College since 2006. We were to mark the 45th this year. That'll have to now wait till 2021. This is the 43rd. But it's been wonderful to have visiting astronomers, largely based in Oxford, coming in and giving talks each year to audiences of a variety of people from within Oxford and the college and local schools, etc. But now it reaches an even wider audience. I know there are people joining us from overseas, so you're all very welcome. My temptation to get up and walk around and gesticulate is very strong. I'm going to try and resist that, but this is a different environment for me, and please do forgive any IT glitches that happen along the way. I'm going to aim to talk for 40-45 minutes or so, and then, as Denise said, I'm happy to take questions at the end. You'll be able to submit these using the chat facility, so that's at the bottom bar of your screen, and if you send a question, Haley at the end will have a look through these and will relay these questions to me, which I will then try and answer, attempt to answer certainly, individually. Also, for those perhaps not as familiar with Zoom, you are able to move the little screens that you can see of myself and Denise there out of the way of bits of the slide. You can move them around. You can actually reduce that down to just my name, and it says Charles Barkley talking by using the little bars at the top of that screen. So tonight's talk reverts to a theme that I've touched on several times before, and that is of the overarching importance of the night sky, its patterns and its cycles, and how important these have been in the whole development of human culture. It's not been a surprise for me to note, as Denise has already referred to, the recent renewed interest in the night sky during lockdown. In large part, of course, I suspect due to the superb spell of clear weather that we've had since March. Indeed, in the evening northwest twilight sky, we've had Venus shining so brightly that many people have queried what it was to me. And it's been joined now by Mercury over the next few evenings. So lo, do be careful, don't look with binoculars near the sun, but Venus and Mercury very close together, and rather a splendid chance to see Mercury. It's very hard otherwise sometimes to see it. In the morning sky, if you're someone who gets up early before the sun, then we have Mars and Jupiter and Saturn in the southeast sky pre-dawn. We even have a chance to see a comet, possibly not by eye, but with binoculars, low in the northwestern sky over the next few evenings. So if you can find a place to go suitably standing apart from each other, then it might be possible to spot a comet, which is a lovely thing to be able to see. So hopefully the slides will change. There we go. So this year marks the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Astronomical Society of London, which very rapidly became the Royal Astronomical Society, or the RAS. And this year we have launched a new logo, perhaps to reflect a more modern and less backward-looking theme. Originally on the left you see it was Sir William Herschel's great refracting telescope on a big wooden scaffold. Now not shown on the modern logo, but on the old logo, I do like the Latin motto, which often people ask me in talks, what does it mean? My Latin is not brilliant, but I think loosely translated, whatever shines should be observed, which I think is a nice thing for us. So if we go to the modern logo on the right, the tilt of the spokes, the change in type of spoke, is at 23.5 degrees. That mimics the tilt of the Earth's rotation axis against the ecliptic, the path of the sun. And the symbol can variously be interpreted as an eye on the sky. For geophysicists, the Earth and the Moon. For solar terrestrial physicists, the Sun and the Earth. There are even 20 of one type of spoke, 20 of the other type of spoke for 2020. And this year was to be a year of many celebrations and organized events. And the year certainly started with a couple of those. But this is now rather on hold. So a strange 200th anniversary for us this year. But all the things I've said just now are all interpretations of a very basic pattern, which leads very nicely to my talk. My talk falls within the remit of archaeoastronomy, that is the study of cultural interpretations of the night sky in ancient times. As I've often said, this is a fantastic area to study. Not only it's relatively new as a discipline, but it's one where there are many more theories than answers, and so is rife for investigation, rife for ideas, and possibly hard for people to say one is wrong. However, there are some things that hold together more than others. We may never know, indeed, what the thoughts and intentions were of the earliest humans who were recording and observing the night sky. For 35 years, ever since I traveled to China in the 1980s to investigate and research the Dunhuang star map, I have been interested in the similarities and differences that exist around the world in interpretations of the night sky. And particularly in the last 22 years, I've been based in the Kennet Valley here at Marlborough, only a few miles from the great World Heritage Site at Avery, and not far from, of course, the even better known site, perhaps the best known site or archaeoastronomical site in the world at Stonehenge. So in 1 hour, I cannot possibly recount all the amazing stories, the complex and beautiful stories that and ideas that have evolved around the world over millennia in different cultures. So what I'm going to do instead is to try and highlight the 3 main applications of the stories that originated. So firstly, what I'm going to do is to talk about, or firstly, one of the things I'm going to cover is that of laying down the basis of cultural behavior, mores and belief systems, as one of the fundamental cornerstones of cultural development. Secondly, and perhaps a little more obviously, the uses in navigation. And thirdly, the calendrical use, and that is the division of the year. What I'd then like to do is to talk about the 3 main areas that recur as themes globally. And the first is Orion's belt and the Pleiades. The second is the northern celestial polar region. And the third is the arch or band of the Milky Way itself. I will end the talk with a little bit of one of my hobby horses, and that is the detrimental effect of light pollution. So, time to kick off. I think it is true to say that ever since the arrival of fire, nighttime gatherings would have taken place. Whether in the depths of winter or perhaps in the cooler nights of continental summers. Stories, poems, songs, and dances would most likely have been the mode of passing on information, pre-writing, to successive generations. And the great thing about a fire is that you can actually edit the people who are sitting around the fire. The youngest could have their stories first and then be put to bed, and then successively older generations. So you could have a graded passing on of knowledge. It's strange, perhaps, to note. Certainly, I find as a teacher in a school, these modes of communication are often thought of more nowadays as entertainment than as a means of teaching. However, we all know that a picture paints 1,000 words. And when one listens to music, and there are certainly examples of music written to convey both messages and stories and themes, one can understand how a vast amount of information can be relayed and passed on. The night sky has obviously always been a source of wonder and inspiration, but I believe it has held a critical role in the birth of cultures and societies all over the world. What one needs to appreciate the night sky is to be less hectic, and also to be based in one place and not traveling around. And the example of our current lockdown is exactly that. And this enables us to focus our shift our focus to our own environment. When Jim Leary, Dr. Jim Leary, he currently based at the University of York, investigated Marden Henge, a lesser known henge just south of where I'm based here in Marlborough. He went there just after leading the most recent English heritage excavation and research into Silbury Hill. I met him there, and he showed me perhaps one of the oldest buildings that they'd yet found, and there was evidence of a sunken hearth. Not only that, but as shown, in fact, in the picture here, many pig bones, copious pig bones, and evidence of feasting. And one could just imagine that in the depths of winter, perhaps a gathering at the winter solstice, stories would be told around a fire, and there would be a hope for shorter nights and the warmth of the new year and the new year to come. But what you need for a gathering of scale and significant passing on of information, of course, is a widely recognized and easily located gathering site. Just down the road from me is Avery Henge. The henge at Stonehenge, the henge itself, the ditch, is not as evident to people. From the air, it's very evident. What people notice are the large stones. But a henge is basically a ditch where the earth is thrown outwards, so it's not defensive. We believe that the henge at Avery originally was something like 15 meters deep, so a most extraordinary amount of work and effort went into it. It's still now 5 meters deep in places. And this would have delineated a circular gathering site, almost certainly for festivals. There are, of course, many theories. But it is possible that it was a gathering site where information could be passed on, and perhaps it is a site of learning. I have a theory. It's rather like an ancient university where one could actually have people coming in and learning about the environment. But that is only a theory. But certainly it is a very significant site. And not only would the amount of work be enormous to go into making the ditches themselves, but of course, over time, erosion would erode a ditch, and therefore the sites that held their greatest importance would have then been marked first with wooden posts and then with significant stones. And when one wanders around the Avery Henge, as I do at various times of the day and the year, it is remarkable to think of the effort to put up these multi-ton stones to mark a site that we need to sort of be aware of this, really, that has existed for, in this case, certainly for millennia, and will continue to do so, probably long after our modern buildings and our modern life has turned into something else. So these are significant places marked for all times. So groups of stars and different patterns have obviously held interest and key places in cultural stories. And here you see a spread in the sky, working from the left, the bright star Sirius, and then Orion, the hunter in many cultures. For many of these things, you have to have a pretty good imagination. But nevertheless, many of us have seen the pictures that have been drawn. And so one can imagine the belt. And in the middle, those three in a line, and then out to right, the little group, the little fuzzy patch of the Pleiades, the seven sisters. So perhaps the Pleiades are one of the most featured parts of the sky in trans-global stories. So the Pleiades are in fact an open cluster. They are the 45th in the catalogue of Charles Messier from the 18th century. They are visible from both hemispheres of the Earth, and they are unique in being resolved as a patch of individual stars by eye. So in a modern telescope, we can see that they resolve into individual stars, in fact, 1,000 or so young stars. And these stars would all have been similar in age and born out of the same nebula. But the sight of the Pleiades in the sky would have been something that people marked. And during the year, the Pleiades would be seen to rise and set. So the first rising or setting on a place in the horizon would have marked 2 dates in the year for all cultures that I have studied anyway, whether to signal the arrival of winter or the arrival of summer, or the advent of annual rains, or the time to sow, or indeed the time when dingoes are born. So one can see that all these events could be marked quite easily by something so obvious and special in the sky. So the use of such cycles would probably initially have been more to signal movement. So before people settled in one place, to signal movement from one place to the other, perhaps from a winter camp to a summer camp. We're certainly aware that this may have been one of the uses of the so-called medicine wheels in North America. Or it could have signaled the arrival, as I said, of dingoes, but arrival of fauna for hunting. But of course, once people settled down in post-agrarian societies, then the dominant use would have been calendrical and used to fix the farming year. So by eye, one can't see obviously as many of these. One mainly can see 6 bright stars. A 7th is slightly dimmer, that's the star Ciliano. Some people claim to be able to see 9 from very dark skies, but I think you're doing pretty well to see 6 or 7. They were first mentioned through the 3rd millennia BC in China. In European culture, the first mention is about 700 BC by Hesiod, so fairly contemporary with Homer and his writing. Now we come on to the beautiful art. Of course, beautiful art accompanies all these cultural stories and has evolved over time to illustrate the various stories. And this is, I think, how one remembers them. In classical Mediterranean culture, the 7 Pleiades are the daughters of Atlas, the famous Titan who held up the sky. Maya, the eldest sister, gives her name to the month of May, where, of course, we are now. The youngest daughter, I think here at the front, is claimed to be fainter and is the 7th and the harder one to see. And it's claimed to be fainter in many stories because it's claimed that she fell behind the others when they were chased away from the surface of the earth. We have representations of groups of 7. And this, perhaps the well-known now Nebra Disk, one of the great archaeoastronomical finds of recent times, almost certainly shows the group of 7 just up and right of center. And these dots, I mean, one could say that that's just 7 dots, but this is a recurring theme. Perhaps the other exciting thing about this find is the fact that it had inlaid gold, and the inlaid gold really does signify the importance of astronomy and this type of object. And we can only presume that this belonged to an astronomer, an astrologer, a druid, a magi, a king, a ruler. To be honest, these are all synonymous. These are synonymous for people who held the power of prediction, people who held the ability of knowledge of the cycles, and indeed could use these. I mean, a good example might be the knowledge of eclipses, to not only gather people, but to create order and structure. This amazing drawing from the Lascaux caves in France dates so far back that it's hard to cope with the timescales. Of course, astronomically, this is a very short timescale. However, it is significant for us, and maybe the oldest depiction of the Pleiades up in the top right. You can see 6, maybe even an idea that there's the 2 stars that are very close together in the Pleiades at the top. In the face of the bull, Aldebaran is usually referred to as the eye of the bull being Taurus, and the V shape of the Hyades cluster is fairly clear. Now, whether this was the intention, it seems to be something that is used in various places, but this is certainly an amazingly old one. It is hard to imagine 17 millennia. It's hard to imagine the accumulated knowledge and experience of 17 millennia that could have been transmitted, of course not in writing. And I thought that, just to give you an example, if the earliest writing on Earth was at the start of our lockdown in March, then these paintings would have been completed in May 2019. So you can imagine that how quickly things change on the current basis, how much would have occurred from May 2019 till now in a year. This is, of course, 17,000 years is a significant fraction of what's called the precession of the Earth's axis. the Earth's rotation axis does precess over a period of 23 or so thousand years. And that means that the stars that we see at different times of the year above the horizon do change. And it's an interesting idea that, in fact, during this period of time, Orion and the Pleiades, which we know as very much winter sky constellations, would have been midsummer sky constellations. And indeed, you know, when the sun rose or set, it would have been in front of very different constellations in the past. So one has to be very careful to take that into account when you put these pictures together. So it may well be these hunting scenes could have been from midsummer or spring, and not necessarily a midwinter hunting scene. So the Pleiades feature really are the most featured in the cultures that I've studied. Obviously, I can't cover all the cultures around the world. It would certainly not be a lecture of 3/4 of an hour. But I'm focusing on ones that I've come across in my travels in the last 30 years or so. So the other dominant feature of the night sky, which is again a transcultural feature seen from all points on the Earth, is the faint arch or band of the Milky Way. This is the band of our own galaxy's spiral arms, our small solar system, one little point among 200 billion or so other stellar systems. We now know over 4,000 other planets around stars. So we have every expectation that almost every star should have a planetary system. And these group together in one of about 200 billion or so that we know of other galaxies. So our galaxy, the Milky Way, is special for us, and we view it from inside. We are in its disk, and we therefore see this band of the spiral arms of the galaxy. The dark patches being the dust and gas from which stars are formed. But what we see is an arch across the sky. And from non-light polluted skies, the Milky Way band is not faint. It is in fact the dominant feature, much more so than the stars. And so bar the Pleiades, it is not that surprising to find that the Milky Way band is actually the most featured other pattern within the sky, and not the other stars. So here this image is taken by one of my colleagues last week from, in fact, just outside Marlborough. Looking south. It also rather nicely, if that's the right word, illustrates some of the twilight sky, but unfortunately one would also tend to see light pollution, and this is taken in a direction where light pollution would not be significant. But sky glow at night, mainly from the street lights and from security lights, is pernicious all over the Northern Hemisphere, and one of the main fatalities, if you like, is that of the vision of our Milky Way galaxy. I'm hoping that many of you will have traveled to low light polluted places around the globe and will have experienced the full awe of the Milky Way. It is incredibly prominent. I remember seeing it for the very first time. It's more prominent at lower latitudes. And especially in the southern hemisphere, that's actually because the central part of the galaxy is more evident. And the Milky Way tends to feature a little bit more in southern cultures. At various times in the year, the arch is in fact more prominent, dividing the sky in two. And this is something that comes up in various stories. At other times, it seems to form a path close to the horizon. When I was traveling in 2017 in Arizona, anyone who's been to wide open plains, or one may have seen it obviously traveling at sea, but if you've seen the wide open plains, half of what you see is sky and half is earth. And it's not really, I think, therefore surprising that many cultures interpret what is going on in the sky to reflect what goes on earth, and indeed the other way around. So the connection between 50% sky, 50% earth, and the connection between the earth and sky is really quite significant. So the cycles and patterns in the sky were able to mimic things that happened on earth, and stories that could be told about them could then relate directly, not indirectly, but directly to the way that a culture or civilization was behaving. Alignments, certainly here is a point that I'm familiar with here at the West Kennet Long Barrow. West Kennet Long Barrow is aligned east and west. And of course that allows the light of the rising equinox sun at the end of March to shine into the chamber. And one finds this, and the eastern alignment of tombs and churches is probably also likely to reflect the importance of the sunlight rising from the east. In fact, many will probably have witnessed a sunny morning Christian service on a Sunday, when the sun illuminates usually the colourful eastern window of a church, and the light spills, perhaps with inspirational enlightenment, down the aisle. So the Kennet Long Barrow is just one of a number of tombs that we think were aligned for this. Many of you will also know the tomb Newgrange in Ireland, where the sun's light fills or enters the tomb on the moment of sunrise of the winter solstice. So another point in the year. Darkness is something that we're programmed to fear. This is a primeval program. The idea of ourselves being hunted has not gone away. Ascribing names and characters to the stars can certainly mitigate this. It's strange for me to say, but over the years of being up at the observatory alone, perhaps in the middle of a clear night, I've actually become much more comfortable. Stars and their twinkling can indeed offer some company. In many indigenous Australian traditions, the twinkling stars are thought to be communicating. And the several thousand or so individual naked eye stars were actually required to be learned by successive generations. It seems an incredible fact to us, but certainly it's possible to learn large numbers. And rather amazing that we have lost that sort of skill. Anyone observing from any one location during the year will notice the rising and setting points of the sun, the moon, the planets, and the bright stars, and asterisms. These are the patterns of the stars. They change over the year. In fact, the difference in direction between the point of midsummer and midwinter sunrise on the eastern horizon and respective sunsets in the west is hugely underestimated. The difference between those 2 points on the horizon is 81 degrees here at Marlborough. It obviously varies with latitude. Here's a picture of the midwinter sunrise taken from Avery, carefully framed by myself between two stones. The viewing position is, of course, critical in making alignment claims, and I therefore think many of these are perhaps rather dubious and overrated. But from any one location, the cycles in the course of each night can be seen, or even in each hour, and are obvious. This circumpolarity is the apparent anti-clockwise rotation of stars and patterns around the pole. In the northern hemisphere case, Polaris is the star at that pole point. This is the projection of the Earth's rotation axis, and so the only point that doesn't move in the night. So many stars, all stars go from east to west, but many stars don't go below the horizon from any one observer's point of view. And these immortal stars were often associated with gods and ancestors. They don't rise or set. And so this part of the sky held enormous importance in many northern cultures. And it's interesting to note that there isn't a bright star close to the southern celestial pole. This is one of the factors that made navigation far harder for the early northern hemisphere explorers, who were very used to having somewhere that measured north, because if you point to Polaris, you are pointing due north. In fact, the altitude, that is the height of Polaris above your horizon, marks your latitude. So it's really quite easy to find where you are on the Earth's surface latitude-wise, and the same can't be said for the south. Here you see stars trailed over a period of time. Actually, you can measure time quite accurately. A star will move 15 degrees in 1 hour. and you can therefore measure time to possibly the nearest 4 minutes or so. It's about the width of your thumb at arm's length in the sky. And this gives rise to us being able to measure the proper day, the sidereal day. That's the rotation rate of the Earth, which is 23 hours and 56 minutes. Another thing I'll briefly mention is Aurora Feature at higher latitudes, mainly in the north, because even Australia is relatively far south for Aurora, and they're much rarer, and therefore they actually have more importance in Australian stories. But we can easily see how stories were made up of spirits. The northern lights, they appear to move and they dance, they touch the ground. In fact, they appear to rise up from the ground. And therefore one can see the importance of those in more northern latitudes. So I'm interested in all the stories, as I said, around the world, but particularly in those that lead to the development of cosmologies, belief systems, and religious texts. It would be impossible to cover all these stories, but my recent experience has led me to particularly to look at Australia, Southern and Eastern Africa, China, Egypt, Mediterranean, Indonesia, North America, and most recently Alaska. Obviously, there are some religions that are clearly astronomically based: Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, based on the lunar calendar, and of course, the Christian Easter is an astronomically fixed day. That's why it keeps wandering. The first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. Globally, there do exist more solar festivals, which is perhaps not surprising. I pinched this from Amazon. One can buy these. It's particularly interesting to note the similarities that exist and the differences in cultural stories caused by the inverted view from the two hemispheres. But it's interesting to note through the festival year that many religious festivals group around the astronomical feast days. So the main days are the solstices and the equinoxes, and indeed the days in between, the two, the so-called cross-quarter days. So many differences exist because of viewing things from different hemispheres. Here to us, Orion would be seen upside down. The belt and the Pleiades, therefore, sort of swapping over. So the stories can variously be in the north, from 3 boys chasing 7 young girls, 3 dogs chasing 7 wild pigs from the South African bush tribes. But in Australia, perhaps 3 fishermen with, instead of a sword hanging down from the belt, a rod above the belt, fishermen chasing 7 fish. So the stories will vary depending on the orientation of the patterns that they see. In 2015, I went out to Australia to meet Professor Dwayne Huamaka, and he is now based in Melbourne. He's studying the vestiges that may still exist within the indigenous Australian cultures of the use of pre-writing storytelling to convey astronomical information. And I was taken to see some of these wonderful petroglyphs at Ku-ring-gai Chase, which is just north of Sydney. And here you see boats, which is a common symbol, because the idea of sailing across the sky and across the Milky Way is certainly common, as well as the fishing boat to chase the Pleiades. We tend to be very northern hemispherist in our here, at least, our knowledge of the sky, but of course different cultures have very different stories. Many, of course, erroneously think that astronomy originated from the Greeks, and the artwork, much of it does, and needs a lot of imagination in most cases to actually see it, but the Orion's belt is very, very clear. So the Greeks, of course, would have inherited much of what they understood from the Babylonians and Assyrians and others before that. There are various interpretations. Orion is often seen as a hunter. Here's a North American version, which also includes to the left the star Procession and to the right the star Aldebaran, and you see the little V of the V of the Hyades. But that is a key part of the sky for most cultures, and again is visible from both hemispheres. due to its positioning in the sky. A wreath can be drawn, or a circle, sometimes called the Winter Wreath, between 6 of the bright stars in that area, and encircling Orion. So from the right-hand side of Orion, from Rigel down to Sirius, to Procession, bottom left, out to Pollux, and then up to Capella at the top, and then back to Aldebaran at the right. Here's an example of another wreath from another culture. So this one from Canada. And of course, different parts of the sky were often associated with different objects on Earth, and one could then tell stories or make importance out of wherever the conjunctions were in the sky, and different connections between the groups of the sky. Many of the animals we know originated with Dura's images from the hundreds of years ago, and these have tended to go into our modern culture. So I think probably drawing in the 15th century. The modern sky, the boundaries decided by the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, is divided into 88 areas. These are the constellations, and many do derive. Actually, only about half of them derive from the Greeks. Many have been added by modern European travellers, especially as new constellations were discovered. So here is our very westernized view of the sky, and the northern polar region focused on bears, big bear, little bear. So the little bear tends to be circling around the sky, following mummy bear. Different cultures will have had different patterns depending on the animals that were important to them. But there are some constant themes. So here we have the caribou of the Inuits, very much center on the Ursa Major, the area of Ursa Major. Within that, of course, is the asterism, the pattern of the plough or the Big Dipper or the saucepan, and not to be confused with the actual area, Ursa Major. But here we have an old man and an old woman who revolve around the caribou. And this idea of revolution is very similar. So here a Navajo picture where you have the fire in the center, and around the fire are the male and female figures. The female figure of Cassiopeia is again a common in various cultures as a reclining female figure. Sometimes patterns in the sky actually reflect things that happen on Earth. So some North American tribes sat people at a meeting in order of the brightness of Corona Borealis, the northern crown. Creation myths exist in all cultures. Here's one from Alaska, the raven of the Tlingit and the Haida culture, some sky creature crushing the will of humans, and the Milky Way itself, its creation and its importance is often told. Here in the Egyptian culture, Milky Way was seen as the goddess Nut, from which we get the word Nui, lying across the sky, and where her legs parted, the bright star Deneb, that was the birthplace of the god Ra. And of course, it's tempting to think that that might be the origin of not only the Ankh symbol, but perhaps even the female symbol. The origin of the Milky Way itself, represented in paintings, here by Rubens, Juno spilling milk, and here Tintoretto's version. In the famous Cixi story in China, it is a female and a male separated by the Milky Way River, and the Vega is the female, Altair the male, a famous love story. Milky Way band is often seen as a river to be crossed, again in a Chinese depiction. And in indigenous Australian petroglyphs, it's thought that the segmented boat may represent the Milky Way. Indeed, the importance of the Milky Way and the patterns of the stars in the night sky in Australia particularly had navigation importance, because in the cooler the cooler evenings, this was a time where people could actually navigate and cross huge distances following patterns in the night sky. I'm going to end with a few more pictures of that I took of the petroglyphs. Here again, a petroglyph of the segmented serpent at Ku-ring-gai. Some cultures focused on the dark patches within the Milky Way. Here one from the Incas, and rather famously, here's a picture of the Milky Way emu. In order to see how that relates to the Milky Way, a picture by an astronomical colleague was done showing the Milky Way and the dark patches there with the Milky Way looking very much like the petroglyph which you see on the rock that I just showed you underneath. And this orientation would have had significance for them. Indeed, at certain angles of the Milky Way would have indicated when the emus laid their eggs, which would have been critical to the survival of their cultures. So I'm going to finish just very briefly with some pictures of light pollution. This is sadly a sky that too many of us see, the sky glow of street lights, but the same UK sky, if you turn the lights off and just use red light, you can begin to pick up the Milky Way. But the sky is far darker and the Milky Way far more prominent. And what you need, yes, you need some clearer weather, perhaps less humid and dry skies, which we don't often get here. But even then, if you can get away from light polluted skies, it's awful to think that so many people don't see them. In fact, many of the children who come to my observatory from inner cities have not seen stars, let alone the Milky Way. So the influence of the night sky depends on us being able to see it. And for younger generations, the effect of light pollution is palpable. Indeed, only this morning, the Countryside CPRE group released the results of their 2020 star count. People were encouraged to count stars within the 4 main stars of Orion. And the star count this morning showed that only about 3% of sites in the UK actually see dark skies. It is actually up 1% on the last time they did the star count, but it's very sad to think this is such a small percentage. So I'm going to end with a quote that I've given before. 2 years ago, a visitor who lived in Utah came to one of my talks on light pollution. She lived with no urban pollution for 50 miles in any direction, and indeed had noticed the change in animal behavior due to very subtle increases in light. And she gave me a quote, and I wanted to end with some snippets from her experience. And she said, "The wild night sky is immensely massive. I would look up at it and lose my footing, which is why we always sat down or lay down to gape up at its enormity. Looking up, life becomes transcendent. The stars are so numerous and bright, they filled the sky more than the darkness does. Indeed, when I look at the night sky now, littered in light pollution, I see our universe is a little less part of our experience as people." And this rings a chord with me, and I think light pollution is certainly something to be tackled. I was going to end there. I have one more slide because the SpaceX Starlink satellites. Here's a picture of the train of the satellites just after launch. There are another 30,000 of those or so of these left to go up. And I used to say that, thank goodness, the one part that man hasn't influenced is our night sky. It's truly our global heritage. But I think that we do need to be very careful that people consider laws and restrictions, and indeed the importance of launching these is clear, but those involved must ameliorate some of their effects. So I've slightly overrun my time, but thank you very much for listening.